here,
Sure.
John. So let's go through these and then we'll open it up. So I've got the first one from Amin. A question to the presenter. So let's say the project team has come up with an optimistic, pessimistic, and most likely estimates for each cost line item of the project estimate. Based on this information, how would you quantify risk and estimate contingencies? What approach do you recommend to estimate cost contingencies?
Well, the method you just stated was line item ranging, which is you take the items in an estimate and you put highs and lows on them. Maybe you set dependencies and then run Monte Carlo. It will come up with plus 30 minus 10 every time. And so I just simply say, don't do that. Stop doing that. 2004, we did research to show literally it was a disaster. So I'm going to tell you right now, if you are using that method, you are practicing unethically, because you know that there is scientific research proving that method is disastrous. So that's why I'm not even going to give you, there are ways to make it better than not, but there's no way to make it best or even close to it. So you simply have to quit doing that. There are a number of methods you can choose beside that. I can give you a long story about how it came about. It was back in the 80s, 1985, At Risk for Excel came out. Up until that time, the parametric method was actually quite popular. John Hackney was making a living doing this. But then once At Risk came out, every estimator on the planet became a risk analyst. Oh, I can take my estimate, put some highs and lows on it, bang, I got this pretty curve. And that was the downfall of the risk analysis profession. So for the last 35 years, we've been in this out in the desert, lost out there, using a method that doesn't work. And the research from IPA showed that our results were getting worse over time and not better. So we simply need to stop doing that. And we need to get empirically valid approaches. So I hope that answers the question quickly. I didn't even want to talk about, now there is a counterpart in schedule. It's called activity ranging, where we put an early and a late on the activities and run Monte Carlo. Same dang thing. Now, the difference with schedule is that schedule risk does not grow nearly as much as the cost. So it looks like it works because maybe it comes back and says you need a 7% scheduled contingency. And in reality, 7 or 10% schedule slip is near the average, but it's accidental. It's like a broken clock. It just happens to match sometimes. But activity ranging also is not predictive of the pluses and the minus. So if you're going to do CPM-based method, you have to use the risk-driven approach, not ranging. We have to just give up on ranging, quit doing it. I know how painful it is because our whole career, that's all we've done. You just have to stop doing it, go cold turkey somehow. That's it.
Okay, thanks, John. Next question, there's a bunch here from Mike Morrison. How do we get owners to recognize the real probability of the ranges that you represented and develop their budgets based on a realistic probability assessment?
That's been the cross I've bared for a long time, and I've had some success one by one. It's painful as heck. I have presented all over the place and published out the wazoo. Nobody reads anything, nobody pays attention. The problem is they like 10% contingency. They like plus 30 minus 10, and it has simply become institutionalized. And it's like trying to pry that out of their dying hands. It's just nearly impossible. So we're working on it desperately, trying to get them realistic. Now, there are some companies more perceptive than others, usually larger companies that have had a lot of successes and failures. But I don't have a magic answer other than to keep pounding away. But because it is so ingrained, it's hard to break. Now, I'm doing a paper in a couple of months says that we have seen the enemy and it is us. They're not making up numbers. They are using the numbers we give them. So I don't really care what they want or how they view them. I, as a professional with a certification, I'm going to produce the real thing. And if they don't like it, they'll fire me. And like I said, I haven't been able to hold a job for the last 30 years, but it is our fault. And I'm going to not point fingers at decision makers. Now, we have some people, like in the UK, there's people at Oxford University that want to say all decision makers are liars. You know, they just cut the costs and arbitrarily, you know, no, they're just, all we have to do is go into the decision with some early scope and use our risk analysis, and they'll understate it because we're the ones giving them those numbers. So I can get very passionate about, we need to fix our own house. Now, we just had a question, I'm not going to ask whose it was, about ranging, when I've been preaching about ranging at a disaster, but we're still doing it. That isn't the decision maker or the owner. That is somebody listening in here today that's doing it of their own prerogative. And we need to stop doing that, not them. So anyway,
That's okay, John.
Yep.
That's okay. I think it sort of feeds into a couple of the other questions. So you can get on your soapbox again. It's quite enjoyable. So in some respect, this is again a follow on from Mike Morrison. You're preaching to the choir to a lot of the people here that are on this call, because we're members of the of AACE, and obviously do this for as part of our business. So it really builds on, how do we educate owners, both public and private, about the fact that the financial folks should not determine the escalation? Do we need to develop an education program to teach owners who we are and what we can provide? The Society of Human Resource Management has advertisements on TV to teach managers. Is that something that we should be looking at from a AACE point of view, to educate our? I'm sort of paraphrasing Mike's question here, but to show people that what they're doing is not the right thing, which is really what you just said.
Yeah, it's you know, I live in the United States, and unfortunately, we are so diverse, and you know, there's free. That there's not many venues, and AACE, none of these people we're talking about belong to AACE. So really, there's not much AACE can provide, because the finance people are not members, the CEOs are not members. So we're kind of limited. Now over in Europe, they might have a little more luck, because with this kind of semi-socialist governments, like in the UK, they have their IPA, their infrastructure project authority, that are able to set some guidelines and standards that are followed. We don't have the equivalent in the United States. We have some agencies like the FTA and others that have guidelines, but very limited. So from AAC perspective, not much we can do. But where there are authorities, you know, we can try to support them. Unfortunately, sometimes they kind of go off the rails. For example, the UK, they're advocating something called reference class forecasting. That is also an economic disaster. And I've been trying to get them to recognize that. And I'm working with a number of academics and professors that believe the same thing. But once somebody in an authority grasps onto some method, it can become counterproductive. And you now have everybody's using the same method because it's in the guideline, but the guideline itself is misguided, you know. So I don't have an easy answer to it. All I can do is keep publishing these recommended practices and preaching and consulting and speaking like I am here. And where I have a chance, I am working, you know, for example, with the Australia Infrastructure Australia has just accepted parametric method as one of their things that acceptable practices, you know. So where I can get my foot in the door, I've been doing that, but it's hard to do that. In the commercial world, it's not so bad because companies like IPA, in the upstream world, Turner and Townsend has a benchmarking authority. There are private benchmarking groups that address these issues, but that's limited only, doesn't work for the public sector. So.
Okay, thanks, John. Still some questions to go, if you're okay. So one here from Cesar. Bank lenders are specialists in risk evaluation. What is your opinion about the risk evaluation of public-private partnership project infrastructure?
Yeah, there's been an awful lot of debate about the delivery method or whatever and how it plays into it. As you heard my talk about lawyers before, the risk profile is what it is for a project. And when you get into the delivery method, it's mainly about risk allocation and trying to transfer the risk from one party to another. And in the conversations, we talk about the mistaken beliefs and things that people have in the risk transfer process. So like owners believe they're transferring risk to the contractor, but in reality, they're only transferring the risks that don't matter. Because if the project truly gets into blowout mode, the owner will pay. And we've seen that again and again. Up in Canada, you guys, all the hydropower projects have had to renegotiate their contract because they got in such trouble that the only way they could finish them was to go back to square one and do a new contract. So it's not going to protect you from the big, nasty risk. It only went from the little one. The other mistaken assumption is that contractors, especially if you're doing design build, will include the risk in their bid price. But in reality, the pressures on the contractor are such they have to win the bid that they are continually cutting themselves short and not funding their own contingency properly. So what you find is the contractor is going bankrupt or near bankrupt. And then once that happens, they start doing unwise action. When things start going south, they start the pressure to cut corners and then they start finding ways to claw some money back from the owner. And all of a sudden you have a claims environment set up, which is bad. That's a systemic risk in its own right. So when people talk about is PPP better than lump sum or this or that or alliances, in my mind, none of them will win. The only way to win on all parts is to have a strong system. If you have strong owner, strong contractor, high quality teams, great processes, all of your software works, it's all tested. I don't care what you do, it will probably come out great. But when it starts to fall apart, then there is no legal form, no contract that in the end of the day will protect you or whether you're owner or contractor. So there's really only one answer is systemic risk. Make systemic risk. Number one, judge the system, quantify the system, then talk about contract strategy. Because none of the things I talked about are in your risk register, and you're not actually going to be transferring much of anything. I'm living in Virginia, and just 30 miles north of me, we have something called the Purple Line, PPP, and the contractor just decided to pick up their tools and go home because the state of Maryland refused to pay their what they said were changes of scope. Maryland said no, so they left. And so now for the last year, they abandoned the site and they're looking for another contractor. Is that a win for anybody? No. So the PPP didn't protect anybody there because Maryland, I'm not going to judge Maryland or the contractor, which one's right or wrong, I don't know. But anyway, both of them went in with the wrong expectations and both of them reacted badly when things didn't go their way. And there's no contract going to protect you from the big things,
Okay, that's good insight. This one's a bit easier. This is from Patricio. Can you repeat what the recommended practice was for expected value method? The reference number, can you remember?
Yeah, it's 65R11 is the integrated. We're looking at what you do is you identify the critical risks that matter, come up with the risk response of if the risk happens, what will we do? And then we have the cost impact and the schedule impact associated with that risk response. Maybe you had 10 or 15 critical risks, you run Monte Carlo. By the way, you include the parametric output as risk number one. And now you have a total integrated cost and schedule analysis. If you want to do what's called joint confidence level charting, I don't know if you guys ever heard of that, but that's kind of a new thing where we want to put the cost on one axis, schedule on another, and we want to get both the cost and schedule, let's say, below P50. But the expected value method will support that also. It is integrated. And the nice thing is it's fairly easy to do. I'm not a big fan of CPM because you have to have a pristine CPM, and it takes a long time. So it tends to be limited only to strategic projects with a lot of resources and time. It's valuable, but it's just not a practical method. Expected value is the way to go for risk events, and parametric for the uncertainties, the systemic inherent risk. Put them together and you got the whole package. Okay,
thanks, John.
Thank you.
A few more questions, if you're okay to keep going. We one from our President-elect, Shoshana. How would you coach an owner with the application of this risk quantification approach for long-range planning of CapEx projects? Given recommended practice 18R-97 now recognizes that these initial estimates are no better than a class 10.
So how do you get them to recognize the risk that's associated with that? Is that what you're asking, Shoshana?
Yeah, like when they're starting out at that initial planning for their long range, asset management, those planning those 20-year projects, planning those life cycle maintenance projects that happen at multiple iterations. How do you get them to factor this in when it, the amount of information that they have is so varied from nil to wonderful?
So the method I recommend, not only a class 10, which for those of you who have not seen it, there's a new recommended practice 01APR, kind of led by Doug Leo and his friends in the public sector. But class 10 is what Shoshana's talking about, is these long range look ahead budgets where you're doing kind of a class 5 estimate, but it's so far ahead, you really don't know what the scope is, or what technology you're going to use. But anyway, what I recommend is we don't, class 5 inherently, there are multiple options. That is the nature of class 5, is that you're never doing one class 5 estimate, you're doing 3, option A, B, and C. And then somebody picks a number, sticks it in a long-term budget. But in reality, you had A, B, and C. Why did they pick B? I don't know. So anyway, when you have that situation of multiple active alternatives, you have to use decision tree type thinking or scenario analysis. So what you do for class 5 or 10 is that you look at the probability of A or B or C, and you may extend that at class 10 to say, what's the craziest technology that is even feasible? And what would that cost? And then, what's the simplest thing? And you would have this huge range, but then run it through a decision tree where you have 10% probability of this new technology, 20 of that. And then you run that through Monte Carlo and you would get a profile that's much wider, because now you just don't have one point and a range. You have point A with a range, point B with a range, and point C with a range. So the range is from off the screen this way to that. That's the way to do it. Does anyone do that? No. So they don't hire me. Nobody hires a consultant at that stage because they're having so much fun making up numbers. But if they did hire me to do that, and I actually did one of those. I did it for a underground gas storage where they didn't know where they're going to put the gas. They had multiple properties that they could flush out the salt. And, some were deep, some were, so anyway, we did a decision tree. And so I did do it once, but there's not many that do that. They should, because the range is, again, not an order of magnitude, but probably double.
Right.
When we talk about plus 100 minus 50 for class 5, it's really probably plus 200. Remember that hydropower I showed you?
Yeah.
What was the range? Plus 300. That wasn't because the project overran. It's because when you do a hydropower project, class 5, you don't know where the dang dam is. You know it's in this general place, but you don't know whether it's going to go in an angle this way or make a turn to the right or go to the end. You don't know anything. You just kind of know the general water flow, and it's going to be roughly in this area. So you could have a dam, you decided it was 800 meters long, and then you come back 4 years later and it's 2,000 meters long with a kink in the middle. Anyway, so that's at class 5, that's what the risk. It's what are the multiple scope options as opposed to we had a scope and what's the range.
Okay, thanks, John. I got a few more. It'd be okay to continue for a bit. One here from Abby. Is there a study that compares the current models with the parametric model for the same estimates?
A study comparing the parametric to the whatever
to another model, yeah.
Well, that was the study we did at IPA.
Okay.
In 2004. Is that it wasn't on a given project. What we did is we grouped the companies that used just rules of thumb and predetermined and ranging, and then something like parametric or empirically based, one form or another, and found that the empirically based was the best method. But that chart I showed you, like the one with the 30-10 bar and then the 80-10 bar, that also was a study of the 30-10 was from my own record, and the plus 80 minus 10 was the meta-analysis of all the published studies. But as far as actually comparing what you did using ranging versus the parametric, just on one project or project by project, I don't think there's such a thing. All we can do is look in group projects, did it this way, did it that way, and compare their outcomes.
Okay.
I can tell you ranging just keeps coming up with the same number all the time. I don't have to do a study.
Absolutely. Okay, thanks. One here from Waldo. John, what is the best way to communicate the risk quantification outcomes to the project team?
Well, the distribution is useful, but unfortunately, decision makers aren't statisticians. So what we've done to simplify it, we talk about the P50 and the P90, and even that, a lot of them don't quite grasp what we're talking about. So that is a challenge. So there has to be some education about, best and worst case, what are those? So for example, I just had a thing 2 days ago. Somebody was getting in an argument about high versus max. Why aren't you using the max? And I had to tell them, Bent Flidberg, Dr. Flidberg did a study of hydropower in 2014. And he had one project in there that overran by 5,142%. And he included that in the distribution. And that's the max. So, that's the kind of, even with people that understand statistics, you get all, but you said that was the high range. Is that the maximum? No, it's nowhere close to the maximum. That's like off the planet because it goes asymptotic, But so anyway, what do I do with decision makers is you simply have to keep it as simple as possible, which is usually the P50, P90 type thing, best and worst case. And then we have to tell the story behind the, what is the most likely. But the P90, I tell people, I don't really give a hoot about contingency. The P50 is irrelevant because there isn't, even with the best method, the contingency is never going to kill the project. if you have a 10% versus 25, the 25% contingency is still going to probably pass the IRR threshold. It's not going to kill the project. What I worry about is the P90, the one that's going to cause that CEO to get fired, the one that's going to cause your career to go down the tubes and destroy your capital effectiveness for that year on a company. So I focus my clients on the P90, and they get mad at me because you're such a pessimist, John. I'm kind of the grim reaper. No, I'm trying to protect your rear end here. It's a 1 in 10 chance. That is not insignificant. That you could double from 6 billion to 12 billion.
Yeah.
And when I was at IPA, they often sent me on these postmortems for these terrible projects. And there's a Canadian company, it was in Alberta, that went into junk bonds back in 1999. It's a mid-sized chemical company, for some crazy reason, decided to build the world's biggest ethylene cracker. And by the way, why don't we build a world-class polyethylene plant right next to it? And why don't we use new technology in the polyethylene plant in an economy that is booming and there's no workers? And you just look at that and go, what are you smoking? And then, well, it doubled. And that middle-sized chemical company, it took them 7 years to get out of junk bond territory. They only got out of it about 7-8 years ago. They're now, anyway, you see these things. And so I like to talk about the P90 and I tell the story about that, and they don't tell me I'm pessimistic, but I think most of them appreciate that. Sometimes I give them the story and they come back to me and tell me how, see, you're wrong, John. It's like, great. You're the 9 out of 10 that did okay. That's great. But they start believing, this is where optimism bias comes in, is they do 3 or 4 projects successfully. We don't have a problem. We don't have a problem. And then the 5th one, boom. We see that up there, I don't even name the company, just recently they did 3 major projects successfully, 4th one off the rails, that they had gotten kind of cocky and then got caught. And the one that you get caught on is the one people hang you on, So anyway,
Yeah.
And, nuclear's that way too, where, the French pull it off, so everybody should. Chinese do it. Why don't we,
Okay. I got three more questions. So back to one from Mike Morrison. John, do you have a home for public sector portfolios which may be funded biennially and finance types that may balance their expenditures by robbing Peter to pay Paul? Some of my program work in the transportation sector of capital projects has been impacted by this situation.
That's true for all sectors. And in the private sector, it mainly has to do with the smaller 200-300 projects within your plant system. Generally, they're 5-10 million each or whatever. But that's what I call portfolio management by cash flow risk, where you have a constrained budget. So they start prioritizing and give the money to one, take it from the other. They may cut scope, they may delay it, they may eliminate it. It's probably the best thing to do. But that is a risk in its own right. And the price you pay is probably a 10 to 30% deterioration of the effectiveness of the control, because, we all know major changes are in the middle of the stream. If you change horses, kind of devastating to morale, devastating to efficiency. So what you end up doing is simply hitting them for 10 or 15, 20% productivity loss. You don't see it. That's another thing. It just kind of, moving people around like that is not good. And that's a systemic risk, except that it's a portfolio level. But it's the same thing everywhere, government particularly. Now, on the other hand, government, like some departments, realize that's going to happen. So, for example, I was working with the Department of Energy. They fund their projects at the P90 because they're only going to go to the Congress one time. They don't want to go back again to get more money from the Congress. So they just load it up. Then they end up spending it, which is not a good thing, but anyway, that becomes part of that systemic, because they have a management by cash flow world of a constrained CapEx annual budget. They end up either overfunding, so they always have enough, or just jerking projects around. And there are companies that have rolling capital. In the private sector, there's a little more flexibility. So what they'll do is every quarter, take a look at their capital budget. And if they need more money, rather than cutting off projects in midstream, they will go back to the board of directors and the stockholders, because stockholders at the end of the day are the ones that approve this money. They will go back on a quarterly basis, say, well, we need to spend another 300 million this year, rather than cutting everything off, do it on a rolling basis.
Okay. Thanks, John. It's good insight. Yeah, we come across that myself, where things start and stop, and it's painful. But one here from Tahir. So, what initial steps should be taken or planned for risk management at the start of a project?
Well, at the start, again, the stronger your system, the more established your methodologies and processes, and everybody's on the same page, the better. But the problem is that's not true. On most large projects, the team is new. They've come together just for that occasion. You might have new contractors that everybody's got a different way, right? So you have to establish a common process for the project. You have to have a risk management plan that's part of your integrated project plan. And we have to agree on the process, the methods, the tools, the systems, and how they're going to talk. What so often you see is that doesn't happen until way too late. And then it's too late to really make them work together. So nobody's talking the same language. So anyway, just everything's about early involvement, getting buy-in and agreement on the processes and methods to the extent you can. Now, owners drive that. Owners are paying the bill at the end of the day. So the first thing I recommend my clients, don't hire me 3 weeks before the board meeting to do your risk analysis. That's a total waste of time. Hire me when you are at class 4 and you now have a single option, and you're planning your basic engineering to get you to class 3. And then what we're going to do during that time is develop the requirements for the project risk management. And we're going to document those in the contracts and say, contractor, this is our process, our methods, our breakdown and tool. And when they submit their plan, it must conform to my requirement. So what I often see, the owners are simply not establishing any requirements. They're totally dependent and totally subservient to the contractors. So what they do is they hire an EPC. They're smart people, right? They'll just do whatever they do. And then they find out EPC doesn't understand owner risk, and they don't conform to the way you do things. And then you just end up in a very, not a very good situation. So anyway, everything's about upfront, have a process, establish requirements in your contract, kick off meetings with the various parties as they come on, get your systems talking to each other. It's all like kindergarten. We all know this, right? I don't have to tell anybody that. But unfortunately, we always wait too late. Often there's no money or support for that. So just need to get up front.
Okay. Thanks, John. We're going to make this the last question, as we're getting close to the end of the session here. So it's quite a lengthy one, but I'll try and do it justice. So client contract language is very restrictive and sometimes illegal, making bidding processes by contractors very risky. And risky was in bold type, by the way, all for the sake of removing total liability from the client. And I'm sure we've all seen that too. This is leading to expensive contracts with no profit from change orders and having to qualify and exclude items, which most of the time is disqualifying that contractor from that bidding process. What about a practice of construction contracts that are balancing risk and encouraging contractors to bid? or else nobody will be able to undertake the job, and projects end up taking double the time, with claims and litigations to the center of the attention. Interesting.
I think most rational people would realize that this transferring of risk to the contractor isn't working, and except for the lawyers, and I don't know why some people think. But the best thing to happen in that situation would the contractors actually put the true cost of that in there and bid it that way, jack up their bid 40% to cover it, and the owner would quit doing that. But in order to stay in business, the contractors don't, or because they aren't allowed to do certain things, they underbid it. And that's where the trouble starts. Then they start going bankrupt. So everybody kind of agrees we need early contractor involvement somehow or other. And we need to work more collaboratively. And so all of those are nice buzzwords. But the problem is this human nature and the fact that there are different stakeholders like the legal people and regulations, and you must bid low price or whatever. There's all of these constraints we have to work in. Now, the other problem is that, again, getting back to the systems and teams concept, is even with the best contract, that is not going to resolve the fact that these systems are not really compatible. Either the organizations, the cultures, the IT systems, nothing connect. So even in the best situation, the contract's not going to save the day. Now, the only thing that can really help is early involvement and getting the systems and the processes ironed out as early as you can. But because of, like you said, the way contracts are done and written, that tends to cut that off. So I'm not a contracting expert. What I see is it's not working. And when I was at IPA, we actually had a hell of a time finding, you'll notice in the systemic risk model, there is nothing about contracting. It's because there's no magic bullet. We keep finding this PPP or something that's going to correlate with better outcomes. Boom, yeah, that's the answer. It doesn't, because of all these other pressures and cultures and overtaking the contract aspect. So just get involved early as possible, one way or another. Now, the other problem I've reviewed estimates where they have, they gotten a contract on early, they have conversion contracts, let's get them in early, we'll keep it reimbursable, then we'll convert it to a lump sum. And I've seen contractors take advantage of that. And because once you get to a certain point, you can't get rid of the contractor. They're so deep that you're stuck. And then at that point, all of a sudden the cost goes up, and oh shoot, so the contractors are often their own enemies, because they're always finding a way. I remember at IPA used to say the contractors are a heck of a lot smarter than we are as owners, and they always finding a way, to get that extra margin. And sometimes that comes back into more legal requirements and more legal constraints to keep them from gaming it. And it just gets worse and worse, So anyway, I know the human nature is kind of prevents the legal angle, from paying off like it should. Now, I think Ed Mera, the owner of IPA, is supposed to write a book about contracting soon. I keep waiting for it. It's been about a year, so I'm waiting for that book, but we may find some better answers there. So.
John, I'm going to call it there, because I think I've got no more questions to read out. I'm sure everybody echo for everybody. Wow, that was fantastic. I know I've been told your presentations are really informative, and I could tell they come from the heart, right? You really believe in this stuff, and you want everyone to believe in it as well. So I want to thank you. I'm sure everybody on that's on this conference tonight have learned something. I know I have, and also reinforce some of the things that sometimes you think you stop believing, because you're banging your head against a brick wall and people don't listen. But I think you've got a lot of people here that this is normal. What we do is what we need to do. And I think your comment that really rung home true to me tonight was the one: is it's up to us to change it. right? It's up to us to change what our clients or our managers or our board of directors, whoever we work for, whether you're working for a client like I do, it's up to us to educate them. Because if we don't, we're just going to be continually seeing project overruns and our businesses go out of business because of it. So, John, do you want any closing comments from yourself?
No, I just want to thank giving me the opportunity to preach. I like to talk, but anyway, no, been great, man. The questions are very good. I really appreciate that. I like questions, so thank you.
Excellent. Anyway, so I'm going to close it there. I appreciate everybody's time on the eve of the Easter weekend, and I hope everybody stays safe in this crazy world that we're living in. I'm sure it's going to change some of the risk profiling we do when we talk about pandemics in the future. And I think I just want everyone to be safe. We will get out of this if we all do what we said we are told to do from our local governments, etc., etc. But thank you. I will be sharing the video of the presentation to everybody who registered tonight. I did note that a lot of people didn't actually join the conference, but I'm sure everyone has their own reasons. I thought our attendance tonight was excellent. I thought the questions were excellent. Thank you ever so much.
I will send you a PDF of the thing too. So if you want to email that to anybody.
Perfect. I'll make that available to the people that registered so that they can have that as reference, as well as the video as well. Okay. At that note, it's just gone 8 p.m. here in Eastern Standard Time in shiny, sunny Ontario. Well, not so quite. It's getting dark now, but please be safe. Have a good evening, and thanks very much. Good night, everybody.
Thank you, John.
All right.
Thanks, John. Thanks, Rob.
Nice to see you again.